exciting to go to galleries. And I was talking to a few people earlier, I've known for a long time, about how we go to East Village openings and then go straight to nightclubs. And it makes I think where the gallery ended and the nightclub began. So I'm going to ask each of you to just give me a little bit of the trajectory, how you ended up here, how you're continuing to explore the themes from 30 years ago, from 40 years ago. And so Judy, I'm going to ask you to start. This is about how you got to where you are today up here.
Oh my God, so when do I start, 80s?
Yeah.
I think it is true that that particular time was very special. I mean, it was special in terms of, oops, sorry.
We didn't have cell phones then.
That's the end of it. I don't even know where it goes. Oh, it is, I'm sorry. Okay.
What Judy's trying to say.
It's good you're not a man.
That's good you're not a man.
Oh,
And
she's.
I think, so I know Stephen since we were really young people, even though at the beginning we showed at different galleries, but they were very close together. And so I think the idea of the rawness of things, the sort of do-it-yourself quality. And then over the last 40 years, I guess I've made my work and I've shown my work sometimes and probably more time working on it and sort of going through transitions of work. And then, so surprising, I came up here, which I didn't realize that I would be happy living here all the time, but I am very happy living here. And my own little planet, it's like I'm kind of making things that look kind of horrific, but I'm happily going along and, like, they're my friends. It's sort of like a kind of sometimes I think it's like playing with your dolls, it's like things that are mine. And just to the paintings that are here, the bigger paintings, were paintings that were started much earlier and that I came back to, and I think it's sort of for me, I've done a lot of work, but I feel like this kind of work is kind of coming home for me. It's really at the core of what I have always done, which is a kind of a hope that I can crack open something that is my own history. You know what I mean? It's like looking at something that, in a way, it's a self-portrait, but in a way, it's also something of just like spilling your head out. Like you have accumulation of things, and then kind of a way of releasing it. So that's pretty much. Like, does that help?
Yeah.
Stephen?
Now I know who you are.
Yeah.
No. Judy gave a talk ages ago, a slideshow, a PowerPoint, I don't know. And she opened the door to something for me, which was she was talking about reworking her paintings and painting over the ones that had moved, etc., etc. And I've been doing that a lot. I would say I've only initiated about 5 new canvases, large scale size, in the last year, compared to in the old days in the East Village. We used to go so fast. I would buy a roll of Dixie or Yankee, which was pre-gessoed canvas, and I had a wall in our studio, which I would just staple gun the canvas up there and razor a 6 foot by 8 foot piece and a 6 foot by 6 foot piece, and be finished with the roll by the end of the week. You know, I came to New York from Montreal. New York was conservative compared to the lifestyle that I had in the 70s in Montreal. But as Bill said, you know, you went to the openings and then you went to the clubs. Luckily, I had a family, and I didn't go to the clubs because I had done the clubs in Montreal.
Which were probably wilder.
A little wilder, yeah. But anyway, I can't go there. So I guess my work is informed, like all of us in the East Village in a lot of ways. We're separated from our own family's history. We migrated to New York, and we lived in an immigrant neighborhood, but most of us probably came from suburbia. Even Jean-Michel Basquiat had a bit of a suburban history to him, or a middle-class history. Well, I equate them, you know. And so I still, or my work is informed by that. But when I paint suburbia, there's a bit of distance to it, which gives it an emotional quality, a sense of loss. So even though I was in downtown New York, after a while, at first I painted anger and rage because we were dealing with the Reagan administration at the time, and I got over that, and I think that was one of the first formalist pieces that I did where I reduced the composition and eliminated the direct anger. And, but there's always a little humor to that separation. And I still deal with that a lot in the work. I went to, I come from a semi-upscale background, but that means that everything that I touch that isn't upscale reminds me of where I am. And so there's that distance rather than a bubble surrounding me.
Because now that the East Village period has been historicized in a number of shows, like, and you were just, I think, with one in Long Island where they had some of the classic early, very aggressive, politically charged giant paintings. Those days have become such legends, and we were talking about the slippiness. Like, I remember going to Gracie Mansions when she was doing, and Patty Astor's when they were doing shows in like bathrooms, and that. How does, like, historically people were almost more comfortable if you were fully in the past tense. If you would, like, if you would overdose in 1985, and it was like, oh, the fact that you continue and are seeing your own early period written into history, how does that make you feel? How does it watching the history get written?
No.
History is a really weird thing, and I think that I'm not necessarily exactly written in, but that time is written in.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing about it, you mentioned Bacon, was that it was just, to me, the end of when it wasn't the art market in the way that it's become. So that the idea, it was such a different time in that way. Even though we experienced a certain amount of like corrupting things because of even the the kind of commerce or competition that was there, but it changed so radically after that. So I think it's a I think that whatever that was, which was youthful enthusiasm, it was really something that had to do with youth in a certain kind of way. And then before that and after that, I was just like a solitary artist. Like I feel like it was a very unusual thing to be involved with a group of people. That was something that was rare, and I don't really know that it ever happened again. But really, after that, I kind of just went back to privacy and thinking of things not as not as commodity, not as merchandise. It's very fun and wonderful to have it as up in the walls here, but it is kind of an interesting thing because most of the time they reside with me. You know what I mean? It's really my relationship to what it is.
But isn't it weird to walk around and see the spaces that used to be the East Village galleries transformed into boutiques and other things now, and like no hint. But then if you go 15 blocks south to like that Chinatown area, there's a ton of galleries that are in spaces not dissimilar to what Gracie Mansion was.
The junkies in the gutter are different.
They were all here?
No, they died.
Oh.
They keep on, there's turnover.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually they've exported it, just like we've landed up here in the valley. I think a lot of the East Village, the negative parts of it have been exported all over the world.
Yeah.
People tell me of their neighborhoods. I just got a call from somebody in Victoria, BC, who said the downtown is crashing. It's supported by fentanyl, appetites, etc. So, we're very fortunate.
Yeah.
Because you asked what's it like to look back at a history that's been written about you. Well, we lived.
Yeah.
We're alive, high five, although we all have survivor's guilt, but not really.
Yeah.
We have survivor's glee. And I guess we made choices with a consideration to long term.
Yeah.
And I think our sensitivity to some of the darker aspects of the empire, which supports us, gives us a real validity. And I think all of us in the room share that validity and are confronting the potential elimination of a perspective.
But I think
What's coming? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think that's true. I think the other thing that you know,
Especially
sort
for
of does in the
Halloween.
show is that like your interview colleague thing, what does it impact you, how does it impact your work? And I think that for me it has to do with just kind of the necessity of privacy and time in a way. And it kind
Exactly.
of the kind of bigger picture that is, you know, this is like hundreds and hundreds of years, so you don't have to really be thinking of the short term, you know, so it's like
Right, right. You don't have to make paintings to sell to survive tomorrow. In the old days, we had to, you know. I mean, I remember Philip Pocock, when I was doing the oil stick drawings, and he'd come into the studio and go, "Oh, you're printing money, lad." Because they were like edible, you know. Yeah. So, yeah, being in the Hudson Valley is kind of great. It's protection, and as Judy said, it gives you the not a bubble, but it gives us the protected area to be introspective, to be self-reflective, and to do the work which we're compelled to do, and we've been compelled to do even before the East Village. That's what got us to the East Village in the first place.
But no, I think about like the first painting I bought when I was an undergrad for myself from an East Village gallery was $125. And I could not believe I was spending that much on a painting. And I remember like caressing it in the cab on the way home. And it's an artist who continues to show in many shows in Asia, because he's kind of quintessentially East Village. And it is, you know, it's, when I think about being a young person entering the art world then, it was so easy. Like you got to meet everyone really quickly.
Yeah, there was a thing, you could have an idea, or Gracie would come up with an idea for a show. The fact that it was an idea that could be translated from one person to another meant it had a certain validity. The show would be up on the walls within about 3 weeks. The show that never happened, but I could imagine happening, would have been and she said, "Oh, I'm doing a show on bad money. Could you do me a painting on bad money?" We're going to do that.
Yeah.
I've got an opening and I've got a space in the gallery 2 weeks from now. So we'd all go to our studios, do theme paintings on the idea of bad money, have the show. Within a week, the magazines would know about it. Maybe they knew about it beforehand, and they would be there, and it would be in a magazine, which, by the way, how many people read magazines? When was the last time we went shopping at the magazine stand? In those days, so the message, the lag between concept and communication I mean broad stream communication, and it was analog. Now you can have an idea and you put it on Facebook or something like that, and it reaches 1 million people for 7 seconds, and then they blink and they forgot what they saw.
Yeah.
It's a different world. How the hell did we get here?
I think you're right, though. I think the idea of being alive and surviving is already distinguishes us in some ways from some of the people.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I think that kind of super high when you said, you know, there were magazines that were interested to a certain, you know, AIDS and Reagan crash. That it was a pretty dramatic thing from having that exposure to having the world change so radically.
Yes.
Well, and because my involvement with you guys was because I ran a space called White Columns that became like the farm team for the galleries. We would show people opening galleries would come, see what we were showing, pick from that. So I was in this kind of like wonderfully naive version where I would just be like, I worked for a man named Tom Solomon who visited a lot of studios. I saw Tommy last week in New York. I ran into him, and he's still doing great. And we both have chickens now, so it was like.
And you should mention
Yeah.
that Tom Solomon was Polly Solomon's son, and he grew up in the shadow of one of the most voracious and fabulous and risk-taking eyeballs in the American art community that preceded the East Village.
Yeah, and her aesthetic was very much tied to that, like funky East Village aesthetics. Do you remember Holly's house with like pattern and decoration everywhere? Did you ever get it? Yeah, that apartment. And so there was this fascinating thing, you know, and what Steve was saying before, it's like I would give an artist, we had these little project rooms. And they would be, like, before the show would come down, they'd be in the next Whitney Biennial and on the cover of Arts Magazine.
Right.
And then they would get picked up by Gracie or guys or someone, and then some of these things were going on. And now I don't even know what a 25-year-old approaching the art world 2025 is going to like how do they negotiate this global thing with
Well, first they're going to
75
go
art
to
worlds?
Yale.
Or yeah.
You know, I mean, they're going to agendize the whole concept because the legwork has been laid down by previous generations.
Yeah.
But on the subject of farm team,
Yeah.
I just want to toot my horn. That painting over there, which is called Dominican Kids, is really from a New York Times photograph of Dominican kids being recruited by baseball scouts.
Yeah.
And I took the photograph and I worked on it and made up the faces and illuminated the gloves that were in their hands standing there. But the grim view of poverty looking for an opportunity while they're being, you know, cruised and appraised is what's behind that piece.
When I'm at your studio, I do see a greater contrast between the subject matter and the work and the view outside your window. Like you've got this wonderful like tree clouded view, and you're in deep woods, and then your themes tend to be pretty cinematically dark.
Yes. Well, you know, even Adventureland on Disney had a dark aspect to it, you know.
Yeah.
Even Thumper had threats and that. He lost his mommy,
Yeah.
you know. Yeah, it's out there.
That's what made
You
it
know.
an adventure.
What's that?
That's what made it an adventure.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, no, you know, I'm the son of a lawyer, and one of the great things that lawyers teach their children is that nothing is as good as it seems. And let's go to the fine print, as Warner Wolf would say. Let's go to the fine print and see what's wrong with your enthusiasm for this particular deal. And if you're smart, you listen to your lawyer.
Yeah.
And my dad was severe in that way, and that he could erase enthusiasm in a heartbeat. It was great.
Stephen, can you talk about cinema and your relationship to cinema?
Sure, sure. Well, I'm a little ADD, so the so the idea of continuity, going from one frame to another frame to another frame, and keeping the subject, it doesn't interest me, you know. But a single frame suggesting the frames that are around it, that I love to do. And I think as much as I love film and I love the stills, I think one of my biggest influences is Dick Tracy by Chester Gould. And he could imbue a single frame with such mystery and threat. You know, that was it. That's one of my departure points. That and Disney, who I love, and and Al Cap. It's very outre with the hippie generation
PC,
because
yeah.
of his situation with Joan Baez, but he was still brilliant. I mean, if you look at some of the concepts that Al Cap came up with, there was one situation where they were looking where could they dump nuclear waste.
Oh, yeah.
And they figured, oh, dog patch, because no one lives there. Well, wait a minute, what do you mean no one lives there? Well, have you looked at their tax base? That was Al Cap around 1949. So, yeah, he was terrific. And, you know, it was interesting. Daisy May, well, this is terrible. My
Okay,
wife
go
told
ahead,
me,
say it.
don't go there, but I have to. I have to, she's there going, oh no. Her breast size changed as America got out of the Depression. She was very small-breasted when she was first introduced, but by the 50s, Jane Mansfield, look out, you know? So I don't know what that means about anything, but
It's a takeaway.
I'll take it.
But it's, like, being your studio, you do have a lot of resources. Like, when I'm there, there's like this cartoon and a newspaper clipping and this. And which sort of makes it the opposite, in that everything you generate comes out of your psyche. When people are like, is that you? Is that your daughter? And you're like, no, they're just the beings that come out from inside of you. So there is a real contrast in that you are a self-generator, whereas you engage in a sort of cultural critique reportage.
Well, I think both of us are both in some ratio.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yes.
it's, you know, because to me, I mean, the idea that somehow something, like I'm Swiss cheese, it comes in and then it comes out. So it has to come in, you know.
Exactly. And my biggest fear was the story of the woman who was crushed by the newspaper she had collected in her New York apartment. So, yeah, I do have columns which you have to kind of negotiate your way through, of source material and things like that. And another one of my heroes in art is Ray Charles. And one of the epiphanies that he imparted was a program to a 1966 concert that I went to, and the program was long format, and it had about 45 songs listed. And it said, Mr. Charles will play from among this selection during the performance, depending on how he feels. And I'm the same way. I go into the studio sometimes and I say, well, what are we going to deal with today? And you know, I could practically knock over a column of source material, and one or two things will jump at me, and they'll talk to me, and I'll be there with it, you know? And then I say, okay, that's a song we're going to sing today. Go ahead.
Judy, the opposite of the single frame, you deal with the multiplicity of frames in each painting. It's like always a multiplicity of frames.
What
as
I started
opposed to
thinking
the
about as
single
being an
frame.
artist, that we are just framing things. That somehow it's not really the thing that we're making up, but somehow we're providing a kind of a frame. And I think that's true. Especially, I mean, for me, the kind of joy of making these was that I could re-enter that frame and find another, you know, like the idea that you could just layer your own experiences on top of things. But that's true. It's like, and if you're ADD, I think I'm the same in my own way, because I can't really stop at one. As I'm making one, I can start to see the possibility of it being something else. So it's kind of always being made. You know, it's in the moment of becoming.
How do you know when there's enough?
It's the biggest question of being an artist, right? I think that for me, like I said, I thought these paintings were finished, you know, 20 years ago. So I guess that was enough for, so like maybe I feel like it's, the other thing about us is that we're in the you know, the final chapter.
Yes.
And so in some ways, I think the understanding that you have up to that, the things you bring along all up to that point, suddenly becomes a means of you seeing things in a different way in your own work. I mean, I think there is a kind of I think that a lot of my work is about aging and about your physical body being one thing and just transforming all the time. Mm-hmm. So I think as you get to a point where that becomes you really are that older person, you know what I mean? That idea of the fleetingness of things, that the moments that disappear and the kind of accumulation that makes you, you know, all your experiences pile up inside, you know, to make you in a way.
More than one person asked me today, since they were seeing the date spans on in the checklist, they're like, so how do we know these paintings are finished now? And I'm like, pretty much the only ones that I think are going to be finished are the ones that sell and go off into someone's house, because then you won't break in to keep working on it.
Right.
But anything that goes back to you is probably going to continue evolving.
I stopped
It's
photographing my
vulnerable.
work because it's just killer to see the thing and go, I thought that was finished. Yeah. I love that idea though. I love the idea that the work itself could be an ongoing thing. You know?
Yes, and going back to what you were saying before about how you take it in and then you grab it or you frame it. So one of my favorite artists is Boccioni, Umberto Boccioni, and he did a beautiful sculpture of a bottle. It was in the futurist / cubist moment, and it's all slashed up with other things, and there was one that was destroyed, which had a piece of a window that was part of the room that the bottle was in, and it became so fragile it couldn't survive. But that's what we're doing. We're bringing in this element, that element, and then we freeze frame it for a moment, hope it's good enough to sell, and if not, we'll keep working on it when no one's looking.
The window, I mean, it is kind of a traditional idea of the window, the painting is the window into the world, but I think that's true, and I think it's kind of a, all work is hopefully implied, so that in some ways what you're showing me shows me a moment, but that implies what came before, what came after, what was underneath at the same time.
The scandal. Just kidding. All of our lives are an implied scandal.
The question of history, of like which collections are paying attention to this period. I was just, Dennis Carden is a wonderful painter who I've known for years, and he's in his mid-70s now, and he has a show, there's been articles about him all over the papers because he had done a cover for a jazz album in the 80s. And he hadn't shown in New York in 18 years. And one of the top European dealers, Massimo Di Carlo, happened to love this album and called him out of the blue and revived his career. And so made everything from back in the days is selling. And I met him at the show, and I was like, Dennis, you are creating so many weird fantasies for artists of our generation, because we all have this idea that there is something, there's going to be the Massimo Di Carlo calling out of the blue and things going on that, and he just said, well, part of the goal is, like, as an artist, you put things out in the world continually from the time you're 24 until you die, and then at some point, for some people, it hits. And I think about your work out in the world and like where I run into, that, is there any sort of hidden things that are out there in the world that you're like waiting to be discovered, like pieces you sold like years ago, or?
I don't think about that much, but I think about Alice Neal and the way she described that you would go into her apartment and they would just be painting stacked up portraits of people that just didn't want those portraits. Yeah. And then suddenly, like, they become the thing that people do want, or maybe the people that were the portraits of them they still didn't want them. Yeah. But it's I think that for me it's always about the joy in making something and the engagement that I have, and it's something that so the idea of it. When I had the East Village was great, and also it was difficult for me. I wasn't really selling things was unnerved me. It really kind of made hearing your own voice and hearing your own clarity of voice is really hard to do, and commerce is not necessarily I'm not that comfortable with it. I mean, I think that's true of all of us. Even though we sold things in the East Village, we weren't really. Even Gracie, she's terribly uncomfortable, I think, with the idea of commerce. You know what I mean?
Yeah. She really certainly was uncomfortable with paying us.
She was very good.
She was good.
But I think that in itself becomes a kind of historical point of view that has value to it, because it's different than the kind of moment that we're right now.
Well, you said the word joy. I mean, that's the operative word. We're trying to remind ourselves to be joyful, and that's what Kamala did as a campaign, so there's a certain amount of validity to it. Making the painting is what it's all about. And it's like, who's that cartoon character? Aquaman, or you could say Brer Rabbit being thrown into the briar patch. It's just our comfort zone. And we're revitalized by it. And I think a lot of the civilian population, I don't think the gallery, but the civilians out there all admire artists because they know that the performing of the obligation overcomes all of the other issues that confront us as individuals. And so they kind of envy us. Some of them are pissed off that we're even there. But
Well, I think it's freedom, and I think it's a
Yeah.
kind of a hard word to use, but that's what it is. So like at least, I think that anything that, and you know, the idea of, I think even in education now, like when you said like how can somebody, you know, maneuver the thing, they're being trained in school to, that's part of the task of the schools, to help those people maneuver, you know, how do you situate yourself, what are you supposed to do? But I think with us, we were like more, we didn't want to do it the way other people told us to do it. I think that was a characteristic of the East Village, you know, that you were sort of, it was a do-it-yourself, but in a way like rethink it, you know, think of it in a different kind of way.
and also we couldn't do what they wanted us to do.
Exactly, because we couldn't.
We tried.
Yeah.
No, and you've taught for years, and you haven't taught
Oh, I taught a little bit.
a little bit.
I watched the students leave. It was,
Yeah.
I taught at the Art Student League actually, and it was kind of great for a moment. And where did you teach? You were teaching a lot.
I've taught a lot, and I've taught over time. I've taught at RISD for a long time, off and on. Taught at Purchase School for a while, Studio School, and lots of schools. I can't think of it this moment.
RISD's got a great pool of students.
Definitely. I mean, the thing is, and I was, you know, Holly really brought me up to RISD, so she was a faculty member for a long time, and I think the thing that Purchase as being different was that when I would talk to, I like to suggest making things in series, and if you talk to RISD students, and they are really a great pool of people, but Purchase, if you talk to students about making a series, you would suddenly realize they couldn't afford to do it. I was suggesting to them that they were getting canvases by this and that, and suddenly it was one of those moments where you think you catch yourself I had presumed something that wasn't really true. In some ways, the students in Purchase have a kind of a grittiness that is really, and proximity to New York, but there has a certain grittiness. So the both was a kind of a great balance of them.
Yeah, the Art Student League, the pool of students was a little bit older. In most cases, it was people that had leisure time in Manhattan, et cetera, et cetera. And I went in there with a cocked idea that I was going to be holding hands with these students and walking through the detritus of New York, and we were going to triangulate between the garbage, their own history, and art history to discover and make even better things based on that. Well, they all wanted to know how to make the apple sit in the still life, and could I give them a technique on, you know, how to draw a baby head or something. I don't know what they were asking, but you know. But some of them, and I really got along. I mean, because they had schizophrenic episodes right after.
I teach in this cultural studies program at SVA. I go every semester. I do a day with them, and trying to get the students to focus on actually what they care about in the art they're going to show as curators, versus how do you get and hold a job in a museum, which is like their first thing. You know, a lot of them come from around the world and they're looking for museum jobs. And what I try to focus on them is like what you get for doing this is you get a life in art where you will be surrounded by interesting people doing interesting things. When you travel, you will meet people in interesting places, and that the gold ring you need to grab for is the life in art, not the cash and prizes.
That's like almost practically un-American.
Yeah.
Ah, girl.
I've been un-American a lot of my life. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, what you're talking about now is like, makes me think of what a person who doesn't have the resources or doesn't have the desire to become an artist, what they can get from the artist who actually makes things. And I know personally what I've gotten is the whole idea that you can frame things, and that's what you were talking about. And for me, if I see a moment or a picture of something out there that I don't like, that's encroaching on my idea of perfection, you know, I just put a frame around it, and I see it as a Diane Arbus or Stephen Lack or some kind of a painting that makes it like, that holds it in time as a precious object, as opposed to the fear of the future that it implies, or the past associations with it. You know, just to put the frame around it is an idea I get from artists who do that. That's so valuable to me in my life. It keeps me accepting life as it is in a positive way. So I
You
really
mean the
appreciate
frame
that.
diffuses it for you? Makes it less aggravating?
No, it makes it,
Contextualized.
it isolates it from the past and the future,
Makes it present and
which
real.
is where the fear is contained. And so I can actually see it and appreciate it for what it is, you know, because it has a frame.
I mean, you were talking earlier about COVID and how it seems like very hard to deal with because it's sort of been just kind of like nobody has framed it.
Yeah.
And that certain artists now
There's
are
no
beginning to
beginning
deal
and
with
end,
it.
or yeah.
And that is the
And
thing
it
that
brings
artists
up all
can
the
provide.
past and futures,
Right.
fears.
Right, it's sort of amorphically there, it's there. Sort of
Yeah,
like-
yeah,
I thought that was kind of an interesting thing,
yeah.
yeah.
I had at the beginning, when I was first starting out, I had different studios, but I never thought of an art career, because in the late 60s, art careers, they didn't exist. I mean, you saw people that had art careers, but, you know, that was, you know, you had to go up the spiral
Yeah.
ramp at the Guggenheim to see that. You didn't know something. And, but I was making large scale paintings and really happy that very few people were doing that. It was like 1968 to 72 in Montreal. And one of my mother's friends bought a drawing of mine, and somebody else was living between two 6 foot by 6 foot pieces that I had abandoned in their apartment. And another friend had 5 people who had my work were institutionalized for anxiety. All at the same time. And I thought I stopped working, right? I said, this is terrible. My work is driving people crazy. But then, like you said, I understood that these people were not being driven crazy by my work. My work was a comfort zone to them. That was the commonality. They were so happy to share the fact that I was aware of the things that were making them anxious, and they couldn't get feedback from the people around them, which is really what drove them crazy, you see? So, there you go. I mean, we do what we have to do, and we talk to people. That's what we do as artists, we communicate. And so many of us are in narrow corridors, and to actually have the window opened and some fresh air coming in, even if it's art chatter, which, you know, we're...
But I also think
I'm good at.
the great thing we do is to make something that we can reflect on after. So you made something that physically had its own properties that you could give it to somebody else. I mean, the
Yes.
object itself carries, like even what you were saying about knowing that the layers are things I put the other layers and then it becomes something else that I didn't know before. So it's something that is, you know, making something
Conversation.
physical in the world.
Yeah, there's always a third element to any work of art, and that's the viewer.
Mhm.
You know, there's the work, there's the situation, there's the artist, and then the viewer. The triangle comes together, and it's a beautiful thing. You know? And the world is moving away from analog, and it's moving away from, what is it? REMs, rapid eye movement. So when you see a still object, your eye has to move around that object. But when you're looking at a computer screen, or a television screen, or a movie, that which you're looking at is moving, and you are now in a passive situation, you're no longer active. And so as a species, we are opting out of being active. When you look, you asked me about film. So the beautiful thing I was looking at Turner Classic Movies, and you're looking at somebody they're bathed in black and white and light and silver. And then once you've been on a movie set, you know that there's 40 people that have contributed to that moment that you're looking at. There's hair, there's makeup, there's light, there's people keeping this place quiet, there's the sound people, there's the director, there's the money people wondering if you're on time and on budget. All of those things contribute to this frame, which is overwhelming you. This is a compression of 40 to 160 different lives in that one frame, let alone the, 24 frames per second that you see in a film. So you're living other people's lives, you're being injected by their energy through the entertainment, and its morality or its intention, and I feel that quiet time that we have staring at a tree trunk or watching a bug crawl across a table is being eliminated because somebody decided that could be monetized. Why are we making money? That person isn't. It could be buying something. Well, we're reaching a saturation point where we're so oversold that we might stop working to earn the money that's going to buy the products that they're selling us, et cetera, et cetera. So we're reaching a serious point of dilution.
That's pretty dark.
Surprise?
So can you see the upside of that we are so saturated with materialism that we do kind of need to move out of our bodies and away from the
Yes.
material picture of things in a way to balance it out.
Right. Well, I paint a lot of cars, and I've never owned a sports car. Okay? So there's a car, and that's a précis of all the sexual aspects of a sports car, right? It's called a G7 because secretly in its design are 7 genitals.
Oh, really?
But when I say it's a précis, it's an approximation. So you don't have to have a Lamborghini, you don't have to deal with the sound pollution or the
Exactly.
if we can balance that, if we can distribute the dream as well as the analog reality in such a way that we are in a zone of sustainability. That's what we have to look at and analyze. A friend of mine told me that the Indians, the Iroquois, they said, yeah, it was you yesterday, Lisa, on the phone. Yeah, so I could remember something. And she said that they have a council when they're about to make a decision that's going to have impact on the Iroquois community. And the template that they like to apply to justify the action is how will it affect the 7th generation? And we don't do that. We have corporations that are listening to the drumbeat of a bunch of, I don't even want to say any pejorative words because it's always going to offend a community of people that thrive in that zone. But there's a bunch of corporate that are drumming their fingers saying, I want a profit right away. I want it in 6 months. I have had clients ask me if the painting that they're buying now will, or that they're considering, because I ended up throwing them out in the studio, if the painting they're considering will increase in value 50 to 100% in 6 months.
Definitely.
And you know what I told the client? I said, the value of a work of art is how much rain it keeps out of your house when there's a hole in your friggin' wall. Oh, they left.
Do you have any more questions?
So Judy, can you talk about the difference in your maybe relationship or way of working between the singular figure of the ceramics and the multitude in the paintings? Do they both feel the same way as being your friends in the studio, or is there some difference in the way you?
Well, they're definitely at the idea of in the sculpture, I think I bypass my brain more. I have the physicality of making it. But actually, in my studio, the ceramics are multiple too. So they're all together, and I think that I always think that everything it's not really the thing, it's the thing in relationship to something else. So that I think that when they inform me, but they're definitely not. I've made some of them where they're like Boccioni kind of like multiple, futurist kind of thing. But I think that the multiple for me as an art, like the maker, it takes the pressure off because it really isn't one. It isn't that the best one. It's how they relate to each other. But I think that the paintings are like with painting, you don't have to really have physics. So you're sort of free that the things can have their own weight or hang or do anything. In the sculptures, you don't have that, but in the sculptures, there's a kind of a thinking that's much more physical. It's much less, I'm physically, I'm engaged in the physical way that it feels. And I think that's a lot of it for me, actually. The way something feels as I'm making it, and the quality of is indicative of the quality of engagement as I'm making it. But I think part of it is also being up here and having it be so quiet. Like I think the idea of the sounds of the people or the artwork it has a quiet place to exist in, so it sort of impacts it. I think the thing of the sculptures and the painting, though, they're sort of like, even if they're just one image, they're kind of like different phases, like the younger me, the older me, you know what I mean? So I think that even in the ones that are one image, they still have the kind of, well, I'll say it differently, like you were saying about things that imply something. To me, I want to imply that there's a person behind the head. Like, in other words, I'm not making the person, but it gives you the feeling that there are things that are active inside of that thing. And that's true of both the paintings and the sculpture.
You have time for one more question? Okay. Thank you, guys. Thanks for being here. And the show's on through December 8th, so please send people. We're open on weekends, 10 to 3 after this, because it gets dark out early, but we're always open by appointment too. If you just call, if you need something to send. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
So you can relax and do it.